The steering wheel felt slippery in my hands, not from the cold, but from how tightly I gripped it. My eyes burned, but I refused to let Jonas see me cry. Not yet. In the rear-view mirror, he sat in his booster seat, small hands folded in his lap, staring quietly out the window. His cheeks were flushed from the cold, his hair slightly mussed from the hug he'd given Grandpa before everything fell apart. He hadn't asked any questions yet. That worried me more than if he had. I blinked rapidly, trying to keep my focus on the road as our family's house faded behind us. The smell of dinner still clung to my sweater sage and cinnamon and something else. Shame, maybe. Or the bitter aftertaste of being told without being told that we didn't belong. We'd brought gifts. Homemade cranberry sauce. The pies Jonas helped me bake. A scarf I'd picked out for my mother weeks ago. All of it left behind on the table like we were never there. Mom Jonas's voice broke through the silence, soft but steady. "Why did Aunt Lila yell at you?" I exhaled slowly, forcing my voice to stay calm. "She was upset, honey. Sometimes grown-ups say things they don't really mean when they're hurting." He didn't respond right away. I glanced back at him again. His lower lip was trembling. Did we do something bad? My chest tightened. "No," I said firmly. "We didn't do anything wrong." I didn't add what I was thinking, that we'd done everything right, that I had spent years doing everything right and still it had never been enough. Up ahead, the traffic light turned red. I eased the car to a stop and reached back, brushing my fingers gently over Jonas's knee. "We're going to be okay." He gave a small nod, but his eyes stayed on the window. The light changed, and I drove on, unsure where I was headed, only knowing one thing for certain: we weren't going back. I was 4 when Lila was born. I remember sitting on the edge of the hospital bed, holding a stuffed bear I'd saved 3 weeks of allowance to buy, and watching my mother cradle her. "You're her big sister now," she said, beaming. "That's the most important job in the world." And I believed her. I watched over Lila like it was my sacred duty, fetching her pacifier, dancing like a clown to make her laugh, reading her stories before I could even pronounce half the words. I loved her before I even knew what love could cost. But little things began to shift. When Lila cried, the world stopped. When I cried, I was told to be strong. If I tripped and scraped my knee, I was brave. If Lila scraped hers, she was carried like glass. I got gold stars and polite applause. She got forgiveness over and over again. The first time she blamed me for something I didn't do, spilling juice on Dad's tax papers, I laughed, sure it was a mistake. But when our parents turned to me and said, "Why didn't you tell us sooner?" something sharp lodged in my throat. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just cleaned up the mess. That pattern didn't change. I worked harder, thinking excellence would earn something like fairness, straight A's, soccer captain, math club. Meanwhile, Lila skipped homework, stayed out late, brought home boyfriends our parents barely questioned. When I brought up the difference, I was told she's just wired differently. You know that. By the time I was 16, I'd stopped hoping for balance. I played my role, the responsible one, the helper, the adult in a child's body. Lila played hers, and she played it well. She could cry her way out of anything, spin a story that made her sound like the victim even when she held the knife. Still, I tried to love her. I convinced myself she just needed time, that one day she'd outgrow the drama. That's what our parents said every year. She'll find her way, they promised. And I kept believing it long after I should have known better. Even after I left for college, I called home every Sunday. Lila never did, but the silence never changed who they waited on. I went to college 2 states away, thinking maybe distance would give our family room to breathe. I double majored in finance and business, worked weekends at a cafe, and still managed to graduate early. I called home every week. My parents always asked about classes. Lila never picked up. She dropped out of community college by the time I was a sophomore. Said it wasn't for her. She moved back home, picked up a retail job, lost it. Picked up a boyfriend, lost him. Then another. Then another. Meanwhile, I met Noah. He was charming and gentle in a way that felt safe. We dated through the rest of college, got married the summer after graduation. My parents were thrilled. Mom even cried when I walked down the aisle. I thought maybe things were shifting. When I found out I was pregnant, I called them first. Jonas was born on a rainy Tuesday. My mother visited the hospital once. My dad brought a stuffed giraffe and left after 10 minutes. Lila didn't come at all. Still, I kept them close. We drove down for holidays, mailed gifts, sent pictures. I wanted Jonas to know his family. I thought showing up being loyal was enough to make things whole. But loyalty doesn't protect you from betrayal. I found out Noah had been cheating when Jonas was 7 months old. A coworker, someone I'd met at the office holiday party. I tried counseling. I tried patience. I tried being everything he said he needed. He still left. Suddenly, I was a single mom with a mortgage, a demanding job, and a child who depended on me for everything. There were nights I didn't sleep, mornings I didn't eat. But I kept going. I built us a life that was stable, quiet, real. And when I couldn't afford daycare, my parents sometimes watched Jonas. When my car broke down, they offered theirs. But the center of their attention was always Lila, her meltdowns, her boyfriends, her wreckage. I didn't complain. I kept my head down and handled what needed handling, because that's what responsible daughters do. They carry the weight, even when no one sees how heavy it is. Even when it becomes the reason they're not invited to the table. 5 years ago, I got a call from my mother while I was in a client meeting. Dad had been rushed to the ER, minor heart attack, she said, but they were keeping him overnight. I left work without finishing the meeting, drove 2 hours in silence, and sat beside his hospital bed until the monitors stopped beeping every 5 seconds. That's when I found out they were in trouble. Not just medical trouble, financial. Their savings were gone, maxed out cards, behind on the mortgage. I asked questions gentle at first, then sharper. Years of covering Lila's expenses, failed business investments, loans to boyfriends that never got repaid. They were a few months from foreclosure and hadn't told anyone. I didn't think. I just acted. I paid off the past due balance on the house, set up automatic transfers for their monthly bills, and added them both to my health insurance plan as dependents. I called my accountant and restructured my budget. I told them it was temporary just until they got back on their feet. But they never really stood back up. When their car broke down, I co-signed for a new one. When the roof leaked, I covered repairs. I even handled the cost of Lila's outpatient program after she was arrested for a DUI, and Mom claimed the stress might kill Dad if he had to worry. They never asked directly. That was the part that stung the most. It was always wrapped in vague phrases, "We're stretched this month," or "We don't know what we'd do without you." I started keeping a private spreadsheet. Over $2,000 a month every month, nearly $125,000 since it began. Still, I told myself it was the right thing. That family means stepping up when others can't. I told myself I was setting an example for Jonas that we take care of our own. But sometimes I'd look around and realize no one was really taking care of me. And when I mentioned boundaries even gently, my mother would sigh and say, "You've always been the strong one, Celia. You'll figure it out." I always did. But lately I was starting to wonder if strength was just what people called you when they wanted to keep taking without feeling guilty. This year, I wanted Thanksgiving to be different. Jonas was finally old enough to understand traditions, to remember details, to connect food and faces with a sense of belonging. I planned to host for the first time, set the table with real linens, roast the turkey myself, even bake the rolls from scratch like Grandma used to. I called my parents 3 weeks early to invite them. "Oh, sweetheart," my mother said, her voice bright, rehearsed. "Your father's been feeling better and we thought we'd host this year, like old times." I hesitated. "Sure, Mom. Should I bring anything?" "Just yourselves," she said, "and maybe your cranberry sauce." "Everyone loves that." I said okay, and I meant it, but something in her tone stuck with me. The week before Thanksgiving, she called again this time to ask if I could come an hour later. "We need extra time to get things ready," she said too quickly. "You know how chaotic it gets." I agreed, but the knot in my chest tightened. That same night, I got a message from my dad. Lila's back home for a bit. She and Brandon split up. I didn't even remember which boyfriend Brandon was. I sent a polite reply, told him I hoped she was okay. The next morning, I noticed they hadn't deposited the check I mailed for their property taxes. A week passed. Still nothing. I tried not to overthink it. Instead, I poured myself into preparation. Jonas and I picked out his outfit together, tiny slacks, a soft sweater vest. He helped me stir the cranberries, added a cinnamon stick like I showed him. "Do you think Aunt Lila will be there this time?" he asked, licking the spoon. I'm not sure I said and meant it. I wrapped gifts for everyone. A bottle of good bourbon for Dad, a cashmere scarf for Mom, a gift card for Lila even though I doubted she'd show. But as the days inched closer, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had already shifted, something unspoken, and whatever it was waiting for us on the other side of their front door. We arrived right on time. Jonas was beaming, holding the cranberry sauce with both hands like it was treasure. I carried the pie's gifts balanced in a paper bag on my shoulder. Dad opened the door with a stiff smile, and I knew immediately something was off. Inside, laughter drifted from the living room. More voices than I expected, cousins I hadn't seen in years, people they never mentioned. Jonas ran to the kitchen with the sauce. I was setting the pies down when I heard her. "What is she doing here?" I turned. Lila stood at the edge of the hallway, arms crossed, glaring at me like I'd walked into her home uninvited. Her voice cut through everything. "You said she wouldn't come," she said to our mother. Mom looked panicked. "Lila, it's Thanksgiving." "You promised," she hissed. "I'm not staying if she's here." "Lila, I haven't said a word about you," I said, my voice shaking. "She's been turning everyone against me," Lila snapped. "I know what you've been saying." Jonas came back and clung to my leg. Then my mother looked at me and said, "Celia, maybe it's better if you come another time." "She's not well." I stared at her. "You're asking us to leave," Dad added softly. "You've always been strong. Please, just this once." Jonas's small voice whispered, "But we brought the pie." No one answered. I took his hand, turned around, and left everything Food Gifts Hope on the table. The moment we pulled away from their house, Jonas stopped talking. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw him staring out the window, his face unreadable fingers twisting the edge of his jacket. I didn't say anything at first. I didn't trust my voice not to break. We drove in silence for 10 minutes before I pulled into the park near our old library. The lot was empty. I turned off the car but left the heat running. "Why was Aunt Lila so mad?" Jonas asked finally, his voice small. "She's upset," I said. "But that doesn't mean she's allowed to yell at people, and it doesn't mean Grandma and Grandpa were right to take her side." He looked down. "Did I do something wrong?" I turned to face him. "No, sweetheart, you didn't do anything wrong. None of this is your fault." He didn't respond, just curled up against the window, and I let him be. I opened my phone out of habit. Missed calls from my parents, a few texts, then a bank alert. $5,000 withdrawn from the emergency account. My account. The one I'd let them access after Dad's heart attack. No warning, no explanation. My stomach turned. I texted my father, keeping it short. "Why did you take $5,000 this morning?" His reply came quickly. "Amanda needed help." "We'll explain." I stared at the message, then looked at Jonas. His eyes were closed now. I had spent years giving without limits. Today, they'd taken the money and thrown us out in the same breath. They didn't even pretend to hide it anymore. Something inside me settled then, not rage, just clarity, and a decision already forming steady and final. We ended up at the only grocery store still open a half hour before closing. Jonas was groggy but curious, his voice soft as we walked the quiet aisles. "Are we still having Thanksgiving?" "We are," I said, running my hand over a row of boxed stuffing. Just a different version. We filled our cart with what was left: rotisserie chicken, instant potatoes, cranberry sauce in a can. Not what I'd planned, but it felt like something we could make our own. Near the freezer section, a woman about my age gave me a sympathetic smile. She had the same kind of cart last-minute dinner cobbled together with what was available. "Backup plan?" she asked. "Something like that," I said. "Elise," she said, holding out a hand. "Hosting solo this year." Plans fell apart. I hesitated, then offered my name. "Celia." "Kind of the same." We exchanged a few stories in the checkout line. Hers involved a stomach bug and 3 canceled guests. Mine stayed vague. Jonas told her he was 6 and liked chicken that pretended to be turkey. At the curb, Elise paused. "This might sound strange, but would you two want to eat with me? I've got enough for 3. And mismatched plates." Jonas looked up at me, hopeful. I said yes. Her home was cozy, imperfect, full of color. Jonas helped set the table. We microwaved sides and laughed about nothing. It wasn't polished or planned, but it was real. We said what we were thankful for. Elise went first, then Jonas. When it was my turn, I swallowed hard. I'm thankful for new beginnings, and people who show up without being asked. And for the first time that day, I meant every word. By Sunday morning, I had printed everything: mortgage payments, utility bills, insurance premiums, rehab invoices, 5 years of quiet contributions, all organized in a folder on my lap as I sat outside my parents' house. I hadn't called ahead. I didn't want a conversation, I wanted a reckoning. Dad opened the door surprised, but not entirely caught off guard. "Celia, I need a few minutes." Inside, they sat like they were waiting for a storm. I laid the folder on the coffee table without a word and opened it. "That's everything I said. Every dollar I've put into this house. Every bill I paid, including the $5,000 you pulled from my account last week." My mother looked down. Dad rubbed his jaw. "We were going to pay you back." "Were you?" Lila walked in mid-sentence, still in pajama pants, eyes narrowed. "What's this about?" More accusations. I didn't flinch. "Did you know I paid for your rehab, Lila, or your therapy sessions, or the car you drive?" She froze. "No," she said slowly. "Mom and Dad, they used my money, every time." Silence stretched between us. "You think you're better than everyone," she muttered, but her voice had lost its edge. "No," I said. "But I'm done being invisible while paying the price for everyone else's chaos." Dad started to speak, but I raised a hand. "I'm giving you 6 months, then the support ends. My financial advisor will follow up with a written plan. After that, you're on your own." My mother looked stunned. Lila looked betrayed. My father looked tired. I didn't wait for their responses. I picked up the folder, closed it, and stood. The weight I had carried for years felt lighter in my hands than it ever had on my back. The transition wasn't smooth, but it was steady. My advisor worked with their accountant to outline a 6-month taper. The first month I paid only the essentials. By month 3, it was half. By the end, nothing. My parents pushed back mostly with guilt. "We're too old to start over," my mother said. "We're not asking for much." But they listed the house 2 weeks later. A modest condo in a retirement community went under contract shortly after. Lila surprised me. She started attending therapy regularly twice a week. I heard from Aunt Lydia that she'd apologized unprompted for Thanksgiving. I didn't hear it directly, but that was okay. I started therapy too. Not because I was falling apart, but because I didn't want to anymore. For the first time, I was unraveling patterns instead of patching over them. At home, Jonas thrived. He adjusted to our quieter holidays, our slower mornings, our small traditions. Pancake Sundays, bookstore Fridays, adventure walks on Saturdays. He stopped asking why Grandma hadn't called. He started asking if Elise and her nephew could come to our New Year's dinner. I said yes. Our house felt different, not because I had added anything, but because I'd finally stopped bleeding for people who didn't know how to stop the wound. Jonas noticed. He smiled more, laughed easier. He had always been my reason, but now he was also my reflection. And for the first time in years, when I looked around, I realized this was home. The night air smelled like cinnamon and snow. Jonas ran ahead with Tyler, their mittened hands swinging between bursts of laughter. Elise and I followed, slowly sipping hot cider as twinkling lights blinked across the trees. "I think this might be our new tradition," she said, nudging me gently. "I hope so," I replied. I watched Jonas spin in circles beneath the lantern tunnel, his face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. There was no performance here, no expectation. Just joy. Just ease. This wasn't the holiday I grew up with. There were no grand tables, no forced smiles. But there was honesty, warmth, a softness I didn't have to earn. Back home, I knew my parents were settling into their new condo. Lila had sent Jonas a holiday card with a hand-drawn snowman and a short, careful note, "I'm trying. Happy holidays." I'd replied simply, "Thank you." I no longer felt the need to explain myself or save anyone. I'd said enough. That night, as we stood beneath the lights, Jonas looked up and whispered, "This is the best one yet." And it was, because this time we chose it. Every part of it.